So,
Okay.
welcome to Darina. Thank you so much for being here in Systems and Wellbeing for Property Experts. Now, obviously, what we were going to talk about today is not really property related specifically, but more about how we can turn up at work in a way, turn up at work, turn up in our lives as a more confident version of ourselves and kind of battle some of those mind monkeys. But first of all, let's have a little introduction about Darina. So you are actually a Bulgarian lady, I think. So it's 3 o'clock where you are,
Yeah, that's
and
correct.
your sort of title that you use to describe yourself is a breakup coach. Is that right?
I used to, not anymore. I'd rather call
Oh,
myself
no.
just a coach because I don't teach people how to break up properly. I just teach them how to be happier in general. So I just prefer
Nice.
the term of just a life coach. That's it.
Life coach. Okay, awesome. But that has stemmed from an understanding about breaking toxic relationship patterns. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. How to
Yeah. So
end
tell
the
us.
cycle of toxic relationships in general, because people who end up in toxic relationships more often than not have some pattern that needs to be broken in order to kind of lift the curse, and just start creating healthier relationships.
And those relationship patterns, they're not only romantic, are they? Those patterns can show themselves in a romantic relationship, but even in relationships with your colleagues or your clients, would that be fair to say as well? Actually, that toxicity can be in quite a few different areas.
Yes, definitely. It's not just in romantic relationships. It all comes from the relationship you have with yourself first, and that manifests in every area of your life. Be it work, be it like relationship with colleagues, with your family, with your spouse, with your children, with your dogs. No, with the dogs, no, because they love unconditionally. They're not as complicated as we are.
Much more fun.
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. And so where do these patterns stem from? Where do like, because surely as we're born a baby, in some ways, some people talk about a tabula rasa, don't they? How actually you're a blank slate. There's some disagreement about that in psychology circles. But say, for example, you're born into a healthy, happy, loving home. What happens next? How come we get so messed up?
Yeah, well, I mean, even if you're brought up in like a very loving home, very healthy, the family dynamics and all of that, there could be some of those subtle covert ways in which our parents transmit messages that they aren't even aware of, such as, for example, your mom is very busy, and then you have some sort of emotion, you're angry or sad, and you want some attention, and then she just tells you, I'm sorry, I'm like busy right now, like let me be. And as children, we cannot really reason, oh, my mom is busy, therefore I'm gonna ask her later. What we think is, I'm at fault, it's my fault that she doesn't give me attention. So we are like sponges. From the age of 0 to 7, we are just absorbing everything, and we cannot reason. And that's one of the ways. The other ways, for example, at school, our teachers or our peers, they can also transmit some messages that are, causing us to, if you were bullied at school or something like that, or your teacher like preferred somebody else instead of you in a very obvious way, let's say, you get that message that maybe you're not worthy, you're not good enough, and things like that. So there are many ways in which that can happen. But the good news is that if we have learned it, we can unlearn it. If we have been conditioned with it, we can just change it. So it just takes work, but it's possible. So that's the good news.
That is very good news. Okay, so there's hope for all of us.
Definitely.
I think it's really
Yeah.
interesting what you said there with your example of as a child wanting your mum's attention and them saying, look, I'm sorry, I'm busy right now. could have come from the mum, from a really positive place, a really understanding place, but as a child you just interpret that, don't you? I mean, within neuro-linguistic program we're taught that perception is projection, and so like a lot of the time you're seeing the world through your eyes, which aren't necessarily what someone else means. It's that whole intention versus impact kind of feeling. And so when you're really little, like you say, you can't logic it, but sometimes it can hit you deep and you don't even know that it's happened. And there's certainly no maliciousness from your mum or your dad or, you know, those teachers or whatever. And it doesn't always have to come from some sort of dramatic trauma, does it? Sometimes it can just be quite innocuous.
Yeah, that's the thing, because many people believe that emotional abuse, when we talk about emotional abuse, when we hear the word abuse, you think it's something very like physical or very violent, which is not the case. Like emotional abuse could be yelling, could be at your child, could be name calling, could be blaming, could be all of those like little things that many people are like doing even unconsciously. And it's not that we like, nobody can be perfect. Like your parents did the best they could, so there's no like room for blame. But I'm not a mother yet, but what I believe is can help a future like a parents to not kind of traumatize their children is if there are moments in which you shout or you snap or something happened because you're like so busy or something is going on in your life. It's important to talk about it afterwards, because if you don't explain to the child, hey, I did that because of that, it wasn't you, it was me, and it's like what's going on right now, then the child is at least now comforted that it wasn't his fault or her fault. It was, yeah. But many people are just too busy and too like stuck in their own heads to really think about communicating, or you know. So I think this is where the problem comes from, and this is actually the same thing in romantic relationships, because everyone has their own mind drama, right? But if we don't communicate with our partners what is going on and why are we acting the way we are, or yeah, it can just lead to giving the silent treatment, and then to basically building up toxicity and things like that, and that's it. And then eventually it explodes in nasty ways.
And I'm sure we've all experienced that at some point or another. So one of the things that you've said there is that the key in any relationship, whether that's parent-child, whether that's romantic, is to communicate how you're feeling about things. But would it be fair to say that for some people, they don't actually always know that they're behaving in a certain way, or they don't know why they're behaving in a certain way, so they might feel grumpy and they might snap, but they're not actually able to later on apologize or explain that because they didn't really understand that it's happening. How do we help them? Maybe we can't, but how do we help ourselves not be that guy? How do we learn what we need to see within ourselves in order to create those communications?
That's a very good question, actually. And the short answer is building self-awareness, because self-awareness leads to emotional maturity. And what emotional maturity basically means is you are able to respond without reacting straight away, because many times we operate from the ego, right? The ego dictates. We want to be right. We want to be like this or that. We don't want to see our own fault. It's always easier to point the finger. Like, I'm acting like this because you are acting like this. What are you talking about? If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be doing that. And it takes a lot of practice to build that emotional maturity with which you are not attached to being right. This is so important, that you are okay with not being right. And like for me, before, when I was in like super unaware, I had no experience in communicating my needs, or even, as you said, like understanding that there was something to communicate, I would just shout and blame and be like this kind of person. And right now, in the relationship I am with my boyfriend, if I am angry or something, when I have built that awareness, I can check in with myself and ask, what is causing that feeling? Why am I being angry? Is it because I'm expecting him to behave in a different way? Is that really something reasonable to be asking for? Is he reading my mind? That's like a big one. We expect that people are going to read our minds, and if they don't, we get angry. And when they ask us, why are you angry? Well, you should know, you know, and then we get even more angry. And yeah, so I realized that nobody can read my mind. I have to go and ask for the things that I want to see in their behavior, in the household, in whatever. And yeah, I think awareness helps to check in. And then the tricky part is how to not let your ego dictate the communication, right? Sometimes I am guilty of allowing it to dictate my communication, but most of the time I have built that practice of not doing it because it doesn't lead to anything good. So you can ask yourself, is that going to help one of the both parties? If not, then there's no point. Yeah. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I made sense.
I think it makes sense. If anyone is there and watching and has any questions, don't hesitate to drop in the chat if you want anything clarified. We can always, and even if we don't notice it right at the right time, we can always come back to you. So please don't hesitate to have any questions, drop them in the chat. My follow-up question then, because I think I understood to an extent what you were saying, it certainly made sense to me, is how do we go about developing that self-awareness? It sounds like a huge task. I mean, where do you even start with that?
Yeah, well, I think that the most important thing we can do is to become aware of our inner dialogue, which is actually also the tool we use to build confidence. We first have to become aware of our inner dialogue. How are we talking to ourselves? What is your self-talk? If you're constantly blaming yourself, judging yourself, and being rude to yourself, then you're gonna show up in mean ways to others as well. Like if you're mean to yourself, you're gonna be mean to others and things like that. So for me personally, mindfulness is the way to go. Mindfulness could be anything from meditation to breath work to even yeah, that's it, I think. I don't know any other ways. For me, it's just breath work and meditation. And I just want to debunk some mysteries around meditation. You don't have to be sitting somewhere in India and eating just vegetarian food or vegan food and just completely live your normal life. Meditation is simply sitting down, 5 minutes with yourself. 5 minutes is enough, and just observe your thoughts, observe your thought process, see what you're thinking about. You're going to be surprised if you have never done it. You're going to be surprised how many thoughts you have, how many are rushing through your head, and they're just, and you might start even judging yourself because you won't be able to stop them. But the point is not to stop them. The point is just to become aware of them. And it takes practice. But if you do it just 5 minutes of your day, just wake up 5 minutes earlier and try to do it. There's like tons of guided meditation out there. There is one application I would recommend to anyone. It's called The Waking Up. It's made by Sam Harris, who is an amazing philosopher and scientist, and he talks a lot about meditation. He has an introductory course for people who have never tried meditation, and he's just guiding you through that whole process, and it's amazing. It's really awesome. I'm not like affiliating or anything like that. I'm just like really, really, really in love with that application. So yeah, or breathwork is also the way to go. And it's like a process. Like you can't expect to become like that person in a day. But if you have patience and if you have the desire and the commitment and consistency, well, then you're up for success.
Amazing. Okay, so working back from where we began, in order to have smoother relationships, we need to have better communication. And in order to have better communication, we need to be more aware of what we are bringing to the table, what we're dealing with. And one great way of doing that is to raise our self-awareness. And in order to do that, you'd recommend something as small but regular as 5 minutes of meditation a day. Yeah?
Yes, yes, you summarized it
Okay.
very nicely. Yeah.
Okay,
That,
amazing. So let's assume we're on the next stage. Let's assume we've been meditating for a little while and we're getting the hang of it. We're getting used to observing our thoughts and not tuning in, not attaching to them, but just going, I see that thought and letting it go. Um, what's the next step for us in order to sort of continue that process of building our self-esteem? So if we're more aware of our self-talk, when we're now perhaps not dropping something and saying, you stupid idiot, to yourself. Instead,
mhm,
you're going, oh, you dropped something, pick it up. It becomes a
mhm.
less emotional process, all of those little elements. Do you think that's then it done? We've built our self-esteem, that's probably nailed it, or is there maybe a little bit something else that we could end up doing?
That's a good question. I don't think that we are ever done with self-work, with inner work, because there's always going to be something that is going to trigger you, some self-limiting belief that is going to come up, something that, for me personally, it's been like that. Like I've done so much inner work and I just peeled so many like layers, and there's still something that I'm like, whoa, I didn't know that was there. Like that's interesting.
Oh
I think that the self-talk and everything you've just said, it's an ongoing process, but the inner child work is also important because when we talk about self-esteem and confidence, we spoke a little bit about how our parents might have contributed to some limiting beliefs. Um, but we store those limiting beliefs deep down into our subconscious. We don't know that they are operating our conscious mind. So it's very important to heal those childhood wounds. And I've done that through meditation again. So you can do that by yourself. And yeah, I think that it's never done. There's always something that's gonna come up, but because the more you are self-aware you are, the earlier you're gonna catch those little things, and you're gonna stop them from building momentum, and then you will be able to kind of, yeah, just take their power away on time so they don't take control over you. So yeah, I guess that's it.
That's so cool. That's so cool. Okay, well, that's the dream, isn't it? To get to a place where you're limiting those self-limiting beliefs. What happens when you're working with someone? How do you assist them with those sorts of things? Because it sounds an awful lot like, they have to do the work themselves. So how, as a coach, are you able to facilitate that?
Well, there are tons of tools and exercises that I give them. One very, very powerful exercise is we call it whack a bob, which is basically we have to give our thoughts a name. Because the moment you give your thoughts a name, you kind of personify them, and then you create that separation between you and your self-talk. Because, like, I think the most important thing people can ever learn is that the thoughts they have are not true. You don't have to believe everything your brain says about you. Like, oh my gosh, you suck at that. Like, is that really true? it, you have to just ask yourself, is what my brain is saying really true? Can I prove that in the court of law? If no, then, well, maybe there's some room for negotiation there. So the whack a bob game is not a game, it's an exercise. Basically, you give your self-talk a name, could be Bob, could be anything, and then you learn how to spot it when it comes up, and then you just whack it and be like, hey, I see what you're doing there, but I am aware of your game, so I'm not going to let you dictate how I'm going to show up. So when it comes to confidence, it's the same thing. Let's say you're very afraid to do a public speaking like event or something, and then your brain is going to start talking you out of it. What if you fail? What if you suck? What if you mess up? What if something happens? And then you have to say, hey, Bob, I see you, but I'm not going to take you for like words for truth, so I'm just gonna do my thing anyway. And yeah, that's one exercise, but of course there is a lot more. It's very individual when it comes to coaching and assisting someone, because everyone has very different situation, but that's something that is applicable to everyone, I think.
That makes perfect sense, actually. I had a therapist a long time ago who suggested I personify the other, the other part of me that I would sort of feel was there sometimes. It was a really interesting way of working. Maybe I
Yeah.
ought to dig that back out of my memory box.
Yeah, it's a very cool tool because it really separates you from the thoughts you're having. And those thoughts are usually either based on the past experience you've had or on some limiting beliefs that you are not even aware that you have, but they're never based on the future because your brain doesn't know what's in the future. That's why you're afraid of it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I love that you said that one of the most important lessons that we can ever have is that just because we have a thought, it doesn't make it the truth. And I think even in ancient Greece, the Stoics would say feelings aren't facts, which is a really pithy way of just explaining what you said. Feelings aren't facts. You might have an emotional response to something, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything. You can analyze it, you can pick it apart, and you can work on that from within. You don't have to act on it. And I think that's where the meditation comes in as well, as it gives you that slight breath before you respond. Would that be fair?
Yeah. Yes, definitely, definitely. It's I think in the cognitive behavioral therapy, they use this method that thoughts create your emotions, and then your emotion creates your results, and then results create actions. And it's always like, for example, there is some sort of circumstance that happened in your life, and then what you make it mean about you, like let's say somebody broke up with you, and then that's a circumstance. It's very neutral on its own. It's not negative, it's not positive, it's just a human decides to leave a relationship. Very neutral. But what you make it mean, for example, oh, I wasn't good enough, that's a thought, but it's not necessarily true. Right? I mean, is that really true? Just because somebody left, does that really mean that you're not good enough? Like, how did you make that up? I mean, prove it, you know? And then if you have that thought of I'm not good enough, how are you going to feel? Of course, you're going to feel miserable. You're going to feel hopeless. You're going to feel desperate. What are you going to do then? Well, you're going to beg them to stay, or you're going to reach out, or you're going to break the no contact rule, right? That's the action that this thought leads to. And then the result that you create in your life is what? You're suffering, you're miserable, and then you're probably beating yourself up for doing all of that. So it's very important to always challenge the thoughts and the beliefs that come up in our heads, because most of the time they're not true and they're always optional. That's so important. Your thoughts are always optional. Always. You can always choose to have more empowering thoughts about yourself or about the relationship or about your work or about your confidence or about anything. And just that,
That's
just
such
knowing
an
that, it's
inspiring
already
message.
like so life changing, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely, that totally has the potential to be life-changing for so many people. And I mean, bringing it all back to property, and because this group is specifically for people that work within the property sphere. I think you're dealing with people at such a difficult time of their lives that actually sometimes they can not be their most self-aware, they cannot be their most kind, polite, all of those sorts of things because they're under a massive emotional stress. And I think that if you're able to remove some of the emotion out of your own responses to their difficulties, you're going to find that those conversations that you're having with your clients are less heated and less explosive at times, and because you're not going to be constantly hurt by the fact that they're being rude to you. That I think
Mhm.
that's what I'm trying to get to.
Oh,
Do you think
yeah.
that does that make sense? I don't know if I
Oh,
explained that very
yeah.
well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that, again, it comes back to how are you interpreting the circumstance? Because you have a circumstance, a client is being rude, it's very neutral, like somebody's just talking words and sentences and having some sort of facial expression. It's very neutral. What do you make it mean about you? Is it about you? I don't think so. It's always about them. So if you don't let your ego react, but rather just take a breather, just a 1 second pause, and think, okay, that person is having their own experience. They're talking from their own self-perception. They're seeing the world in a different way. It's not about me. It's not about my work. It's not about my house, like whatever the real estate, I don't know. It's not about any of that. It's about them. So how can I react or respond to their reaction? How can I respond to their reaction? So maybe I can shift away that energy. And if you respond in kindness, most of the time people are so shocked because they expect drama. They expect somebody to argue with them, you know? They expect that. And when you counter that with like, oh, how are you feeling? For example, are you having a good day? Can I help you with something? They'll be like, what? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Are you crazy? You know, that happened to me, I think 2 days ago. One woman was like, excuse me, girl, I was in front of you in the queue. I was like, I'm sorry, I didn't see. Like, how are you feeling? She was already ready for a fight, you know. And then when I countered that, and she just looked at me, she was like, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to be rude. And I was like, wow, look at that. Because
That's
you can dictate the outcome of the situation, I believe. And you just have to take ownership and responsibility for your own reactions, emotions.
yeah.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
I think so. You broke up a bit my end, so I hope that other people were able to catch that. So I think what
Oh,
you were saying
okay.
is that you've got the power to help someone else's emotional state just by giving them a bit of space to have that emotion.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Definitely. Because if you put yourself in their shoes, you would like it if somebody does that for you, I think. Right? Everyone would like that.
Mm, definitely. I think a lot of the time within agency, the agent becomes a bit of a punching bag, and I think there can be a lot of blame put on someone in an estate agent's role. And I think that is when, probably from what you've been, to use your words, from what you've been saying, that's when our ego rushes to defend us, doesn't it? And that's when
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we can say the wrong thing because actually we're getting blamed for something that we know is not our fault, or, we had nothing to do with, or they've misinterpreted, or they've been lied to by somebody else within the situation. Often happens as well. And I think then our ego rushes to defend us because, we're under attack. But you're suggesting that actually if we meditate, if we work on our self-awareness, we take 1 second of pause before we respond, we can choose how to deal with that situation in a slightly less emotional way that perhaps will benefit us and
Mm-hmm.
should really benefit the client as well, actually, because we're giving them that space to say and vent, maybe. Does that sound right?
Yeah, definitely. And you can look at it in this way. Your ego, it we want to jump and defend you and argue and make the drama. But if you think about it, if you choose not to let it dictate the outcome, you win. What do you win? When you win better emotions, you win probably a client, probably you're gonna close the deal. Like it's a win-win situation for all of the people around, including you. Like you get to feel good. So isn't that amazing? You get to feel good. So what else?
It's all we're
Yeah.
all striving for, isn't it? Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I've had you for a whole half an hour. So I want to say a massive thank you. I want to honor everyone's time who has popped on and watched live. If you catch this later on in the group, please do hashtag replay to let us know that you've watched it. And I'll be putting it out on Anchor and our YouTube channel. So how can anyone get in touch with you if they wanted to find out a little bit more about what you do and how you do it?
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. First of all, if you guys want to reach me out, you can look me up, Darina Savova on Facebook, or The Human Coach on Instagram with DA, not the, but DA Human Coach. So I think Ellie will also tag me in the post, I guess. So yeah, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for being here, and I hope everyone found it helpful. And get in touch with Darina if you want some more support. And have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Bye.